Good morning, Ohio State fans. Welcome back to the 11 Dubcast for Wednesday, September 17th. I am joined by the 11 Warriors deputy editor, Dan Hope. Dan, how are you doing in the middle of this bye week? You hanging in there?
I am hanging in there. I'm enjoying seeing the sunset behind you.
Yeah, it's nice. Shout out to our man in charge of the site, Jason Priestus. After 2 years of recording with a camera that had real bad depth perception issues, I got hooked up with a new camera in a celebration of this new venture with the Dubcast, and I'm already very much enjoying reaping the benefits of it. So it's yeah, nice to finally have my windows open and not have to set up a screen to remove all of the background from behind me. So I'm glad that you're taking it in. Not to ramble too much about what's going on behind me, because we're a forward facing show. We want to focus on what's coming ahead. But before we do that, we do want to give a shout out to our sponsor at 11 Warriors this season, First Bank of Central Ohio, also the official sponsor of the 11 Dubcast. From game day to work day, First Bank of Central Ohio is proud to support the business owners that keep Central Ohio thriving. They are locally owned, business focused, and always in your corner. Give them a visit at fbcentralohio.com. Now, Dan, it is the bye week, tragically, which means there's not a lot of developments we can talk about relative to Ohio State's going to keep it a little bit under the wraps, I think, in terms of what they're working on the bye week. And then going into Washington, I'm sure we're going to have a better sense of how things have kind of moved and adjusted. And we don't, unfortunately, have an opponent to look forward to this coming weekend in terms of how what's going on with Ohio State might play off of whatever the strengths or weaknesses of the opponent are. However, we are on the precipice of conference play, and you are preparing to do something of a state of the Big Ten ahead of Big Ten conference play. And the Big Ten is bigger than it's ever been. It's certainly no longer just down to 10, although that's been so sort of true ever since they implemented the conference championship game, in fairness. But we are 18 teams deep. We're almost two Big Tens, if you will, at this point. So as you prepare to do your own set of Big Ten power rankings going into the heart of conference play, which team would you say has impressed you the most or has surpassed your expectations relative to what we were thinking about these teams in the offseason?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think, obviously going into the season, I had thought, Penn State, you probably not as high on Penn State as me because you have a long-standing disdain for James Franklin. But, I thought going into the year that, Penn State would be the class of the Big Ten along with Ohio State. I think Oregon is the team that, to me, has looked like Ohio State's top competitor so far this year. Now, part of that's because Penn State really hasn't played anybody, so it's too hard to really gauge anything off of Penn State right now because they didn't play anyone with a pulse in non-conference play. But I think Oregon has been really impressive so far. I mean, the way they demolished Oklahoma State, 69-3, I believe, that was quite a statement performance for them. I'm really looking forward to this Illinois-Indiana game this weekend. I think, Illinois is a team that I had high expectations for. So far, they're living up to them, but this will be, the first big test for them. Playing against the Hoosiers, a team that's also off to a strong start this year, looking to back up what they did last year going into the CFP. So, those are certainly some of the teams that, have impressed me the most so far with what I've seen from them. And I'm going to be interested to see, between, Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan has a bad loss, but, they're, still could be a factor in the Big Ten and CFP races. Washington, of course, coming up on the schedule next week for Ohio State. I think there's a lot of good teams in the Big Ten this year. I think the Big Ten, I thought coming into the year that the Big Ten had a chance to be as deep as it's been in a long time. And it's early because we're just getting into conference play, like you said. But so far, it feels like that's being backed up. But I think there's a lot of really quality teams in the Big Ten this year.
Yeah, I think that there's, to the point of you thinking it's a deep conference at the moment, that there's definitely more than a few schools that would fit as the answer to this question. Frames Janklin biases aside, I probably wouldn't say Penn State just because I mean even the likes of like ESPN, albeit maybe this is just to put extra pressure on a big Big Ten school for the sake of propping up the SEC when they inevitably need to advocate for them to be in the higher CFP positionings as we get closer to that season in November and December. That being said, they put the championship or bust label on Penn State this season in terms of this is a team that should win the national title. And through the first handful of weeks of the season, they've, at least in the beginning of these games, where they've still ended up winning and usually in dominant fashion, but they've had really, really slow starts against really inferior opponents. Now, pot calling the kettle black, we all just watched that Ohio State Ohio game. That being said, I think Ohio is still a better team than a lot of the ones that Penn State struggled with in the beginning of their schedule. So I don't think they've necessarily lived up to expectations yet. I think I'd probably say Oregon. There's a lot of people that are saying that, you know, in spite of the fact that Oregon had a team that was number one for the entire season up until Ohio State beat them in the CFP last year, that this team that Dan Lanning has now might somehow be even better than that one is. And I don't know if people expected them to be people expected them to be near the top of the Big Ten, I think, again, certainly, but it was kind of viewed more as a two-horse race definitively between Penn State and Ohio State. And I honestly would consider Oregon more of a credible threat at this point than Penn State at this point in the season, but it'll be interesting to see how things evolve. I kind of want to answer Nebraska as a bit of a dark horse, but you know, they beat Cincinnati by a field goal in the opener, and then their two opponents since then have been Akron and I think Holy Cross, HCU.
No,
I'm not.
Houston Christian.
Oh, okay. So it's HCU, but regardless of how you interpret that
An
HCU
FCS school
acronym,
is an FCS school.
yeah, exactly. Not the most impressive name on the list. So you know, we will see. I'm cautiously optimistic that the environment that Big Red poses will be too much for Bryce Underwood in Michigan this weekend. We are going to preview some of the Week 4 college football games on the last episode this week, but we're going to save that for a bit of a later time. So I think I'd probably have to go with Oregon. Even though, because I think that's probably the blend of like high expectations relative to surpassing those. But there's certainly more than a few right answers to this question. I think USC is an interesting consideration too, now that they're starting to slowly creep into the top 25. And I've heard some people say that they have one of, if not the most impressive offense in the sport this year so far. Whether or not you agree with that, it's a different conversation. Obviously, they had a bit of a weird, turbulent game against Purdue, but there was a big delay and everything. So I kind of give them a bit of a grain of salt on that one.
And I think USC and Nebraska for me, they're both they're both very much wait and see teams because I mean I remember last year USC goes they beat LSU week 1 and I totally drank the USC Kool-Aid like this is going to be the year and then they went off a cliff from there. Nebraska, I mean it's not the Scott Frost era anymore, but I think I'm just scarred from like a decade of just mediocrity from that program where it's like I need to see it to believe it. So I think you're right. I think both of those teams are off to good starts, but they haven't really played anybody. So I need to see it as they get into tougher competition.
I would completely agree with you. Now, as for the most disappointing team in the Big Ten, it seems like a cop out to go with whatever team is like considered to be in last place at this stage. However, it's not often that you see a head coach fired 3 games into a season. It's not often you see a head coach fired 15 games into their tenure. But that is exactly what happened to Deshaun Foster over the weekend. It was funny. I was helping you guys with coverage of the site and Ohio State this weekend. And I get done writing up that Kirk Ferentz has surpassed Woody Hayes. And I'm thinking, okay, now I can go focus on the poll post that because the AP is going to be out in like a half hour or whatever. And then Deshaun Foster gets fired and I have to write that up immediately. And it kind of comes out of I don't want to say it came out of nowhere, but it's like, wow, really 3 games into the schedule that they've already gotten rid of this guy. It's really that bad. And not only that, but I mean, it's weird that their game against Nebraska or not Nebraska against New Mexico, in which they lost 35-10. They give up 21 points in the fourth quarter. There was a journalist from an Orange County newspaper that posted a photo from the stands of the Rose Bowl, and they're like, the stadium was like hard, maybe not even an eighth full. I mean, it was a really, really dire scene there, and the mood probably just got even worse. I just thought it was interesting that, okay, if you're committed to firing this guy after that result, that game was Friday night. Why did you wait until Sunday to do it? Did you need to take a day to like sit on it and really think about if this was the right move to give all the players in your program an opportunity to transfer 30 days out after the season has already started? But they ended up going with it. The situation at UCLA is pretty dire, and they were getting dunked on by even the likes of the Pac-12 official Twitter account in terms of like, oh, it's we're so sad that you've left at this point after how disastrous their start to their time in the Big Ten has been. So I would imagine you agree with me, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on the situation surrounding UCLA and what outlook they have at all going forward. And I know I just asked you the question, but I didn't even mention on top of all of that the whole circus surrounding Nico Iamaleava. Like that's just the cherry on top of this disaster that seems to have been circling the Bruins. So, just what are your thoughts on UCLA's outlook at this point, given what took place over the last weekend?
Well, I don't think the Pac-12 should be dunking on anybody because their two current members are a Washington State team that lost 59-10 to North Texas this weekend and an Oregon State team that's 0-3. So don't think the Pac-12 should be dunking on anybody. But with that being said, I mean, it's not a cop-out. I mean, without a doubt, UCLA is the most disappointing team in the Big Ten. And it's not just because they're the worst team. It's because of what you just said. They made one of the highest profile transfer portal moves of the entire offseason, bringing in Nico Iamaleava. Some people were talking about this guy could be a first-round NFL draft pick. Well, he certainly hasn't played like that, and it's been a disaster of a start to the season, as evidenced by Deshaun Foster's firing, which I didn't necessarily expect to come this soon. But I mean, you look at UCLA's schedule. They play Northwestern in their next game next week. If they don't win that game, it's going to be hard to see this team winning a game at all because you look at the rest of that schedule. You got Penn State, Michigan State, Maryland, Indiana, Nebraska, Ohio State, Washington, USC. They're not going to be favored. I mean, they're probably not even going to be favored against Northwestern, but they're certainly not going to be favored in any of the rest of those games. And so this is a UCLA team, despite making one of the highest profile additions in the transfer portal, could be staring down a winless season if they don't somehow figure something out under an interim head coach. And so, it's been a disaster there for UCLA for sure. And I don't think anyone else really even comes close in terms of who the most disappointing team would be. I think it's so early in the season. Like, I think really the only other team you could really even put in that conversation would be Michigan, just based on the fact that they lost that game to Oklahoma. But
I'm not opposed to any Michigan slander.
I'm sure that none of the Ohio State fans listening are either. But I do think, without a doubt, if you were circling the most disappointing team in the Big Ten, it's UCLA. Because I'll be honest, I was just looking back at my ballot for the preseason poll that I was in. I had UCLA 12th, and they're clearly the 18th team in the Big Ten right now. So disastrous start for the Bruins.
It's still in the bottom half, so I'll give you credit for that in terms of predictions. By the way, I meant to lead off the show with this, and you got me sidetracked when you complimented the sun that has since set in the background of my view. I didn't directly anoint you to this position, but I did lump you in with the rest of the Bo Jackson hype beasts last week when we did our last show before the Ohio game. And I mostly do that in jest anytime anybody's talking, particularly when their only performance of note is against an FCS team like Grambling State. I'm always the person that is like, all right, let's get them some actual game experience, and then we can put the hype on them. I don't want to say that I outright dump the bucket of cold water on that or anything, but I'm a guarded skeptic when it comes to a lot of these things. But you were outright on the Bo Jackson campaign before this breakout performance. And Dan, you are the oracle of the Ohio State football journalism world because of outlooks like that one, and you deserve your flowers. So I'm going to give them to you right now. And I said earlier on the show this week with Chase, I owe you an apology. I owe an apology to Dan, and so I'm giving it to you right now. Dan, you are sharp as they come, and you saw this coming. And I look forward to seeing how this three-way committee works out for Ohio State's running back. So kudos to you,
Yeah.
sir.
Thank you for that. I don't know that I was the only one who saw that, Bo Jackson was emerging, but I think certainly a second game of evidence against Ohio. I mean, even I was like, I had a feeling it was trending that way, but I didn't, I was like, yeah, it's just an FCS game. We got to see. But I think it's become pretty clear now that he is, at a minimum, he's the most explosive runner on the team. Will Ryan Day and Ohio State fully commit to him? Will they maybe kind of continue to be a little bit hesitant to make a freshman the number one back? It's kind of hard to tell him that right now, but I do think it's becoming clear that Bo Jackson has a different gear than either of CJ Donaldson and James Peoples. And if he continues to run the way he has in these last couple of games, at some point it's going to become too obvious for him not to be that lead back.
Absolutely. Well, we will look forward to reading your thoughts on the rest of the Big Ten teams to this point in the season a bit later this week. We are halfway now through, almost halfway through Ohio State's bye week. And I know we're counting down the days until Ohio State football comes back. It'll be September 27th, and we're all looking forward to that. But there are plenty of intriguing college football games on this weekend that we'll have to look forward to, that we will have Dan back on for Friday morning show to kind of we'll give a quick rundown of what you should have your eye on. So you'll have a full slate of interesting things to watch as an Ohio State fan that we'll try to give you a little bit of a preview of. But we will be back on the 11 Dubcast tomorrow with Andy Anders to talk about more developments surrounding Ohio State during this bye week. Until then, Dan, thank you very much for joining me once again. And thank you to First Bank of Central Ohio for sponsoring the 11 Dubcast and 11 Warriors this Ohio State football season. We'll be back tomorrow morning. Make sure you're subscribed to the 11 Warriors YouTube channel so that you get it as soon as it drops. Until then, we'll see you soon. Take care, folks.